Yeah, you already know it's Bucket of Love It Reaction. We back with another one, man. Look, y'all know how we do. Man, we tapping into whatever, however, whenever. Hey, man, we got one for y'all today, man. I ain't gonna lie to you. Rapper gets shot in the face till he's unrecognizable because he spoke on G Herbo. Oh, yeah, let's get right to it.
They caught him on the block early morning and let off over 40 shots until his body dropped. His face was torn apart so bad that people barely recognized who it was lying there. Some said it was payback for a track that went too far and cut too deep. Others just whispered that in Chicago, the streets never forget when you disrespect the dead. Out here, words are not just words, they are life or death every time you spit them. This story is about Cedron Doles, better known as Shooter Shells, and how everything came crashing down. To really understand where Shooter Shells came from, you gotta first look at Chicago's South Side. For decades, the factories closed down, jobs dried up, and whole families got pushed out by redlining and segregation. Blocks filled with poverty, abandoned homes, and no opportunities left young men turning to the only structures that felt real, which were the gangs running the neighborhoods. The South Side turned into a battlefield where every corner was claimed by somebody. Back in the late 1950s, two teenagers named Eugene Hairston and Jeff Fort started what would become the Blackstone Rangers in Woodlawn. They organized like it was a real institution, with rules and codes they borrowed from older crews like the Vice Lords. Over time, they rebranded as the Almighty Black Pea Stone Nation, and that name carried weight all across Chicago. By the mid-'80s, their leader Jeff Fort was talking with Muammar Gaddafi from Libya, trying to hustle terrorist deals for millions. The government labeled them a serious threat because they mixed religion, politics, and heavy violence, all tied into the street structure. From those original stones came a lot of branches that would later shape the drill generation. On the east side and around 79th Street came NLMB, also known as No Limit Muskegon Boys or Never Leave My Brothers. From other corners came Black Mob, who carried their own reputation tied to car theft and retaliation. By the early 2000s, the beef between these factions was already turning deadly. Rumors spread about a young Black Mob member named Lil Saya being killed during a car theft gone wrong, and stories say No Limit was behind it. That only poured fuel on the fire and brought years of gunplay between the two sides. This was the world that raised Shooter Shells. He learned quick that the block was teaching lessons faster than any classroom. Every young dude had to pick up on who was family, who was a rival, and what words you better not say when crossing another side. By the early 2010, a new sound was shaking the city, and it was drill. In Chicago, the word drill always meant shooting, and that energy became the soundtrack of the South Side. The beats were cold, heavy, and built on dark melodies, while the rappers delivered raw stories about surviving their blocks. When Chief Keef dropped I Don't Like in 2012, it blew the doors wide open.
Not gonna
A
lie.
teenager from the hood with a viral
Not gonna lie. When Chief popped out, that's that I don't like. World went crazy. I ain't gonna lie. The drill scene went up. Bang bang. Alright.
video showed that drill could make local kids into worldwide stars overnight. Drill was different because it blurred lines between real life and music. Rappers were not just talking about violence in general, they were naming their dead rivals and putting enemies on tracks.
And not to, you know what I'm saying, like, I got y'all. But nah, like, yeah, that's what drill is. Self-snitching. You can't do no drill song if you ain't telling us how many bodies you got. You know? If you ain't letting us know how you did it, probably ain't do it. But that's what confused me about this generation, man. This generation, you don't get no recognition unless you do the crime. Then tell the world you did it. That's how you get your props.
The more raw and reckless you sounded, the more people online paid attention. It became a twisted form of clout chasing, where mentioning names of the deceased could boost your rep, but also paint a target on your back. Social media gave drill a megaphone. Instead of beefs staying on one block, now disses could spread across Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube in seconds. A song recorded in someone's bedroom could reach the rivals' phones before the day was over. That made every diss way more dangerous because it wasn't just local gossip anymore. It was public humiliation on a big stage. Cops and the feds were watching it all unfold. Law enforcement started pulling lyrics and videos into court cases, saying they showed evidence of threats and gang
Hip-hop
affiliation.
police.
For artists, that meant their words could bring police heat just as much as street retaliation. This was the climate Shoota Shells was stepping into. He would pick up a mic, say the names directly, and carry that beef into the booth. For him, the music was not separate from the war, it was another way of fighting it. Cedrin Doles was born on September 10, 1995, in Chicago's Humboldt Park neighborhood. He came up in an area known for poverty, drugs, and constant gang presence. Families struggled to hold on, schools lacked resources, and police patrolled heavy across those blocks. For a young kid, daily life meant walking past abandoned houses and hearing gunshots echo at night. People close to him said he grew up tough, but carried natural talent in music. By his teenage years, he started calling himself Shoota Shells. That name was built to sound raw and dangerous, exactly how the streets respected a young rapper. Shells wasn't chasing polished industry sounds. He was chasing recognition from his block first. Online blogs mentioned his family had already faced loss, saying his brother Hakeem died in gang violence. Mainstream sources never confirmed it, but the name Hakeem keeps coming up in user-generated sites. Whether the details were exact or not, losing close blood in Chicago shaped the young man deeply. That type of pain became fuel inside his music later. Shells dropped early tracks like Real Ones, which picked up attention locally. The sound wasn't studio polished, but it hit hard in the neighborhood. His delivery came with a gravel tone, heavy energy, and no attempt to water things down. People could feel it wasn't an act because he was living inside the stories he told. Affiliation with Black Mob followed naturally because he grew up around that circle. Black Mob carried a rep tied to stolen cars and street retaliation, and Shells represented that in his lyrics. He wasn't the type to chase flashy chains or industry styling. Instead, he leaned into an aggressive street image. That edge made him stand out even when bigger artists were rising across the city. By the time 2016 rolled around, Shells already had a name buzzing inside drill circles. He was seen as outspoken, raw, and never afraid to name rivals directly. That reputation was both his greatest strength and his biggest weakness.
I mean, you got to think about it. When you live in that kind of life and you in that kind of circle, you are your environment. You know, a lot of these, these young men, you know what I'm saying, they grew up around that type of environment. So you're a product of that. And it's unfortunate that that's all most of them know. You know what I'm saying? Not knowing all this was designed, for this brother and that brother to go against each other, or however it may be. It was all designed,
Weakness. To understand why Shells' words cut so deep, you have to know about G Herbo and NLMB. G Herbo, once called Lil Herb, came out of No Limit territory around 79th Street, known in the city as Terror Town. NLMB stood for Never Leave My Brothers, and the crew treated that name as real family. In April 2010, Faison Robinson, better known as G Fazo, was killed at age 18. He was shot near 79th and Escanaba Avenue, and his death crushed the NLMB circle. In 2011, a memorial barbecue for Fazo was hit by gunfire, with 5 people wounded as they gathered. His memory lived on because friends renamed their neighborhood Fazoland, and the name stuck. When G Herbo released his first mixtape, Welcome to Fazoland, in 2014, it was more than music. He was telling the story of his neighborhood while keeping his best friend alive in sound. That mixtape cover and lyrics were filled with Fazo's name and influence. It turned personal pain into public recognition and brought Herbo major attention. Another loss came in 2013 when Jacoby Herring, known as Kobe, was murdered after leaving a late-night party. He was 21, and the shooting happened just blocks from his home on the south side. G Herbo felt it directly, and the pain turned into another tribute project. His 2015 tape, Balling Like I'm Kobe, showed him kneeling by Kobe's grave on the cover. Every track carried his friend's memory, and fans felt the grief through the music. Herbo's projects turned those tragedies into memorials, making sure the dead were never forgotten. For NLMB, those names, Fazo and Kobe, were sacred and untouchable. They were reminders of loyalty, brotherhood, and the pain of surviving Chicago's streets. Shooter Shells knew all this, and yet he still chose to mention those very names. Months before his death, he mocked Fazo and Kobe in his diss track, directly disrespecting NLMB's fallen brothers. That move turned his music into something much more dangerous because it wasn't just rap anymore. For NLMB, it sounded like straight disrespect to the graves of their closest friends. Herbo turned grief into legacy and built national respect through memorial tapes. Shells turned those same names into fuel for beef, building notoriety, but also putting himself in the crosshairs. That decision would eventually push the tension past music, dragging him deeper into the war already spinning on those streets. The feud between Black Mob and NLMB had roots stretching back years, and the streets carried the history like scars. People talked about how it started with stolen cars, since car thefts were the hustle that gave Black Mob their early name. Rumors say Black Mob members Fats and Lil Saya boosted whips, sold them off, and built a rep off that grind. When Lil Saya was killed during a car deal gone bad, some believed NLMB was responsible, and the beef deepened. Territory played a big role too, with both crews claiming space around the south side. NLMB ran out of 79th Street in Terrortown, while Black Mob operated nearby, and overlapping blocks brought constant clashes. When young men from the same city live blocks apart but represent different sets, one bad move can start a war. The early 2010s saw blood spill that cemented the hatred. In April 2010, Fazan G. Fazo Robinson, a beloved NLMB figure, was killed at just 18 years old. That loss turned into an entire movement because NLMB renamed their neighborhood Fazoland. His death burned into the memory of everyone who lived through that summer. In February 2012, Jamal Rock Harris was shot and killed while inside a store on East 79th Street. Gregory Glindsey, 61 years old, died outside in the same attack, and 5 teenagers caught bullets during the chaos. News reports confirmed it was a gang-related shooting, and word spread fast that Black Mob was in the mix. By August 2013, Jacoby Kobe Herring was dead after being found shot multiple times near South Yates Boulevard. Kobe was another NLMB name that meant family to Herbo and his circle, and his murder hit hard. The funerals of these young men became more than mourning. They became stages for rivals to mock online. Social media posts turned into celebrations of the dead, with ops getting dissed in captions and music. Every new body pushed the score deeper, and every new track added more pressure to the war. By the mid-2010s, the beef was set in stone, waiting for one move to explode again. By 2017, Shooter Shells was ready to take things further with his music. In April of that year, he dropped a video titled Death of 150, a direct shot at NLMB and their nickname 150 Dream Team. The song was more than entertainment because it called out names that mattered deeply on the other side. The lyrics went after Jamal Harris, Jacoby Herring, and Faison Robinson, all 3 murdered NLMB members whose deaths shaped Herbo's music. Shells didn't just mention them casually, he taunted them with lines that sounded like a challenge. At one point he said, "Tell Rock, Kobe, Fazo, you're gonna see them soon." That type of bar wasn't regular rap. It was a disrespectful swing at the foundation of NLMB. The visuals matched the lyrics because Shells sat in front of the camera with a handgun, looking dead serious. His delivery was gravelly, his tone aggressive, and the pacifying hookless style made it sound rawer. For viewers, it looked like someone speaking from the street, not the studio. The video spread across YouTube and social media, reaching not only fans but also enemies who felt the disrespect personally. The FBI later described those lyrics as menacing threats in an affidavit filed to search his iPhone. Federal agents said the video gave probable cause that Shells was promoting retaliation against NLMB, showing how law enforcement blurred music with evidence. To the feds, it was not just art, it was proof of intent to keep the violence alive. The community response split down the middle. Some people thought it was clout chasing, saying Shells was only trying to get attention. Others whispered that the track was basically a suicide note because no one disrespects dead NLMB members without consequences. On the streets, mocking names like Fazo or Kobe meant you were crossing a line that guaranteed smoke. Online chatter blew up after the song dropped. Forums and YouTube comments lit up with speculation that NLMB hitters were furious. Rumors kept circling that Christopher Mad Max Jackson, known in drill circles as a feared enforcer for NLMB, took the track personally. G Herbo himself would later rap about Mad Max in songs, painting him as someone with no feelings when it came to hits. Fans started connecting the dots, saying Shells' diss might have sealed his fate with the wrong man. Whether Mad Max really planned retaliation or not, one thing was clear. The diss track placed Shells at the center of a storm, and people on both sides knew the streets were watching. From that point forward, every move carried heavier danger because the words he rapped were now heavier than bullets. On the morning of July 10th, 2017, the neighborhood of Auburn Gresham was quiet, but everyone knew that quiet never lasted.
No.
Around 9:30 a.m., Cedrin Shooter Shells Doles stepped out of a friend's house, moving toward his car parked on the 8100 block of South Paulina Street. He wasn't on stage, he wasn't in a studio, he was just walking across the block in daylight. A white Nissan Altima rolled up, pulling into position with a calm that made it clear they knew what they were doing. The car doors swung open and 3 men jumped out, each armed, moving with speed like it had all been rehearsed. Witnesses later told police they didn't shout, they didn't warn, they didn't waste a second before pulling triggers. Gunfire ripped through the air as the shooters opened up, spraying round after round toward Shells. Investigators counted 43 shell casings on the ground, a number that showed the intent wasn't to scare or wound, but to completely finish the job. Bullets tore through his head, chest, arms, thighs, and feet, cutting him down in seconds. People on the block saw him collapse as the shots kept echoing. A witness described how Shells tried to stumble toward his car before his body gave out. He fell hard to the pavement, his face struck so many times it was almost impossible to recognize him. That detail spread quickly, making the story more chilling when photos later surfaced online. The 3 shooters didn't hang around after the barrage. They jumped back into the Altima, leaving behind smoke, blood, and panic. Neighbors ducked back inside their houses while others called police, but by then the car was gone, vanishing into the south side streets. Responding officers arrived within minutes and found Shells' body lying next to his vehicle. He was pronounced dead at 9:40 a.m., and investigators immediately noted the attack was too calculated to be random. A white Nissan Altima with 3 armed men showing up in the morning wasn't coincidence, it was a planned ambush. The autopsy painted the full picture of what happened that day. Shells had gunshot wounds to his head, chest, right arm, right thigh, right foot, right calf, and buttocks. There were graze wounds across his forearm and wrist, showing how many bullets tore past him, even as others landed. Medical examiners documented the damage, and the description of his face being left unrecognizable became the haunting detail that stuck in headlines. Police told reporters the hit was targeted, not the work of reckless shooters spraying a block for no reason. The placement of bullets, the close distance, and the overwhelming firepower all pointed to a clear objective. They didn't come to scare him, they came to erase him. That line became how people described the ambush because it captured the way 43 bullets left no chance of survival. Word of the murder spread almost immediately through the city, first in Auburn Gresham and then across drill circles online. For those who knew about Death of 150, the ambush felt like the retaliation everyone had been expecting, even if no official suspects were named. The way the attack happened, broad daylight, multiple shooters, and such overwhelming firepower showed how serious the beef had grown. By midday, Chicago police had sealed the block, collecting shell casings and interviewing shaken witnesses. Neighbors described the chaos of that morning, how the quiet street turned into a war zone in seconds. Some told officers they didn't see the shooters' faces, only the blur of men jumping in and out of the Nissan before vanishing. The killing of Shooter Shells wasn't just another body to those who followed drill culture. This was a young man who had taunted rivals by name and ended up gunned down in the exact type of violence his music described. His ambush was a chilling reminder that in Chicago, disses and lyrics could become death sentences. Despite the brutal nature of the killing, mainstream outlets didn't rush to cover Shooter Shells' story. For the first few days, coverage came mainly from hip-hop blogs and smaller news sites. CollegeKid.com reported that he was shot multiple times while walking to his car and confirmed he was pronounced dead at the scene. Hip-hop lately also covered it, focusing on how he was best known for diss tracks aimed at G Herbo. XXL magazine later picked up the story, noting that Shells was hit several times in the face and body. They highlighted how photos of his body began circulating online, fueling the phrase that his face was left unrecognizable. That detail became the most repeated part of the story, overshadowing even the fact that more than 40 bullets had been fired. Online reaction was immediate and loud, especially across YouTube, Twitter, and drill forums. Some fans expressed shock that Shells had really been taken out after dropping such a direct diss track. Others posted memes and mocking comments, a reflection of how Chicago's drill culture often turned tragedy into viral content. The internet blurred the line between mourning and ridicule, and Shells' death became another case for outsiders to analyze. Circulating images of his body fueled more chatter. The photos leaked quickly, showing him lifeless on the pavement, and those visuals spread faster than official news reports. For some viewers, the images were proof of how violent the streets had become. For others, they were just more content in an endless cycle of Chicago drill drama. The limited mainstream coverage made the story feel underground, even though the violence was headline-level brutal. While local outlets eventually acknowledged it, the narrative was carried mostly by blogs and hip-hop-focused media. By the time bigger publications mentioned it, the online community had already dissected the killing, pointed fingers, and tied it back to death of 150. What stayed consistent was how the headline framed it. Every site used the phrase about his face being unrecognizable, and that became the lasting way people described his murder. It reduced a 21-year-old artist to a shocking image, capturing how drill tragedies were often remembered more for gore than music. After the murder, federal investigators joined Chicago police to piece together what happened because the scale of the attack raised too many questions. The FBI filed affidavits later that year explaining why they wanted access to Shooter Shells' iPhone found at the scene. They said the video, Death of 150, contained menacing threats toward NLMB, specifically Jamal Harris, Jacoby Herring, and Faison Robinson, and they needed to see if messages or calls tied him to other plots. Special Agent Ian Hellenius wrote that the shooting looked like a targeted effort, not some random act of violence. The affidavit included details from the autopsy, describing bullet wounds across his head, chest, thigh, arms, and even his feet. Graze wounds stretched across his wrist and forearm, showing the amount of gunfire he tried to avoid. Law enforcement believed the sheer number of rounds proved the killers came only for him and wanted no mistakes. Still, despite all the evidence, no one was ever charged, and the case has stayed unsolved officially. On the streets, though, rumors filled the silence left by the police. Forums, YouTube comments, and blogs all pointed toward Christopher Mad Max Jackson, a feared NLMB figure known for putting in work. User-generated wikis even listed Shells as one of more than a dozen alleged victims tied to Max. G Herbo fueled the legend when he rapped about Max being on so many hits that he had no feelings left. Fans connected lyrics with the killing, deciding the diss had brought down Mad Max's wrath. Mad Max himself would later be shot in August 2018 and died a month later in September. Reports said he was ambushed leaving an apartment building and identified a rival named Hell Rel before passing. The rumor cycle tied him to Shells' death even more tightly, creating a myth where one feared hitter took out another loudmouth rapper before meeting his own end. None of that was ever confirmed by investigators, but in drill culture, stories become history if repeated enough times. Other rumors claimed Black Mob insiders might have been behind the hit. Some posts said Shells fell out with his people over stolen car money, while others suggested disloyalty. None of those stories had credible backing, and the evidence pointed closer to retaliation by rivals. Still, once gossip spread, People believed different versions, proving how drill stories always grow larger than the facts. Shooter Shells' killing turned into another lesson about drill and
Domino
clout.
effect.
His diss track brought attention, but it also brought danger that he could never escape. In Chicago, naming dead rivals was a game of Russian roulette, and sooner or later the chamber spun back around. Some said he died chasing views, while others saw him as someone who simply spoke his truth too recklessly. Either way, the streets proved unforgiving when his body was left on South Polina Street. The broader conversation also looked at how police treated drill music. Prosecutors across the country started using rap lyrics as evidence in trials, arguing they showed intent or confession. Civil rights groups pushed back, saying no other genre gets criminalized for its art. In Shells' case, the FBI never claimed he murdered anyone, but they still used his lyrics as justification to dig through his phone. For many, that showed the blurred line between entertainment and criminal evidence. Mainstream media framed his death with the same language, focusing on the gore and the fact his face was left unrecognizable. The music often took a back seat in those stories, with outlets chasing shock value over deeper context. His family stayed mostly quiet, only surfacing in scattered blog mentions that showed their grief. Activists reminded people that Shells was just one of 13 people shot in Chicago that same July day. The cycle of gunfire didn't pause after his death because the city kept losing young lives to the same type of ambushes. In the drill scene, his death raised awareness about the risks of calling out names. Some rappers slowed down on direct disses, but others doubled down, using tragedy as proof of authenticity. Within a few years, King Von and FBG Duck would also be gone, showing the violence hadn't stopped. Meanwhile, artists like Polo G and Lil Durk found ways to evolve, keeping drill alive without always relying on mocking the dead. Shells' legacy lives mostly in Death of 150, the very track that put the target on his back. It remains online with millions of views, both celebrated and condemned, a piece of drill history carved into Chicago's memory. His story highlights how art, identity, and violence are locked together on the South Side. He wanted recognition, he found it, but the cost was his life at 21. For people outside Chicago, the lesson was simple but heavy. Drill music isn't just entertainment when names are real and guns are waiting. For the city, his death was another reminder that, without real change, the cycle of retaliation will keep spinning.
Hey, I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna let y'all get out of here. It's like a revolving door. You know, you kill one person, you don't know who he related to, but they know you, and they retaliate on you, and vice versa. Speaking on the dead is something no one should ever do, no matter how angry or upset you are at an individual. Speaking on the dead or dissing the dead is only going to open up an invitation. This culture has changed a lot. There's a lot of things that a lot of artists just will never be able to fix. And that's their mindset. There's a lot of young men out here that have no control over their emotions, but yet they're raised in an environment that's heartless. So how do you survive? Feel me? So that's what they do. They adjust, they survive. You know, I know looking from the outside in, we say, well, why don't they just stop? Because the violence evolved way before their time. Yeah, but this is Buckle Over Reactions, and I'll be right back, man. Y'all stay locked in. Appreciate y'all.